How did one woman max out 7 credit cards before hitting rock bottom? How did she then manage to pay off $20,000 in credit card debt in just 2 years? And how can understanding your marginal tax rate versus your effective tax rate keep you from making a huge Roth IRA mistake? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 55th episode. Can you believe it? 55 of the DoughRoller podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out buried under a mountain of debt or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, everybody, it's Rob Berger. Welcome to episode 55. You know, I tend to record these episodes usually just a couple of days before I actually publish them, because there's a lot of work that goes into a podcast after you record it. And so it takes a couple of days, and I have some help from some folks that get all that done. But as I record this podcast, the stock market is, was down yesterday by, I think, 1 or 2%. It's down again today. And it's kind of interesting to read the commentary. Everyone wants to try to understand why. And you'll read, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, CNN, all of the big news sites, the New York Times, they try to give a rationale for it. Sometimes the market just goes up and it goes down. I mean, that's just what it does. But now is a good time, particularly if you're one of those folks, and I know they're out there because I used to be one of them. I guess kind of still am, where you track your portfolio every day and there's a bad day in the market and you open it up. I use Personal Capital, but whatever you use to track your investments, maybe you log into your brokerage account and you look at it and it's down and you get depressed almost. It's a good time to really think about your investments and your asset allocation. It's not a good time to make changes. I think the best time to make changes are when the market's not really going up or down. It's just kind of boring. A boring time is a good time to really think about your asset allocation. But if you are thinking of selling during a down market, that may say something about what your asset allocation ought to be. Perhaps it's too weighted towards stocks. Anyway, just something to think about. Before we jump into today's show, I want to mention, I've mentioned this in the last couple of podcasts, but I'm really looking for folks to leave reviews of this show on iTunes. So for the month of April, if you leave a review on iTunes, whatever it is, good, bad, or whatever, I want honest reviews and ratings. Shoot me an email at dr@doughroller.net. Let me know that you left a review. You don't have to tell me what it is. I'm not even going to go look. But for all the folks that shoot me an email, I'll randomly select one for a $100 Amazon gift card at the end of the month. Again, this is in April 2014, so if you're listening to this podcast after that, the drawing is over. But if you're one of the regular subscribers and listeners and you haven't left a review yet, take a couple of minutes if you would. I'd love to get your honest review of the show so that I can make it better. Okay, the money tool of the day. And this one comes from some personal experience of having lost some data in the past. But this is, we rely now more and more on our computers. I mean, that's just the reality. And I have a lot of data on my computers, both for my finances and for my business. And, backups are always a pain. I'm sitting looking at my system now. I've got a hard drive connected to my desktop. I've got a wireless hard drive where I can back things up wirelessly, although that can get pretty slow. And so I've started spending some time looking at cloud storage, where you can back up your systems, and it could be for your business, for your finances. It could be family photos. I mean, when you think about things in your home that you'd hate to lose, I mean, our pictures, frankly, are as valuable to us as just about anything. And so one of the backup options that I found that I think is good and is one of the most reasonable is Carbonite. And I like it. There's others out there. You've probably heard of Dropbox, and I've used Dropbox. I find that Dropbox is more expensive and has limits. Carbonite, it's unlimited online backup storage. It backs up your files automatically. It'll encrypt your files, obviously for privacy. And you can access your files from really any computer or smartphone where you have internet access. And they have a whole bunch of different plans. I mean, you'll see if you go there, they've got plans for businesses. They've also got personal plans. And the one that I looked at that I think is probably the best for most people and for me is their least expensive plan. It's $59.99 a year, $5 a month. And you just can't beat it. If you want to check it out, they actually have a 15-day free trial. To find it, the easiest way is just to go to DoughRoller.net/Carbonite, DoughRoller.net/carbonite. It'll redirect you to their page. You get a 15-day free trial. That's what I'm doing. Whatever option you use, whether it's Carbonite or something else, if you have not backed up your files, again, whether it relates to your finances, investing, or just, family movies, pictures, whatever, you need to get those backed up however you do it. I think Carbonite's a good solution. It's, of course, not the only one. That is the money tool of the day, though, whether it's Carbonite or something else. Have a tool that allows you to, and it's got to be automatic. If you have to push a button to do it, if you're like me, you're going to forget about it. Find an automated way to back up your computer. So that brings us to the main part of the show, and it's a really good show. I think you'll enjoy it a lot. I had a chance to interview Beverly Harzog. She is the author of Confessions of a Credit Junkie, and she tells her story in some detail, and it's a painful story in some ways, although it has a happy ending. And I think particularly for those out there, either whether you're struggling with credit card debt or you know someone that is, this really is a podcast you have to listen to. So let's welcome Beverly to the show. Beverly, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we were just talking about podcasting, and Beverly, you're thinking about starting a podcast for your blog.
Am.
Yeah. And just so everyone knows, what's the name of your blog?
My blog is BeverlyHarzog.com. I don't have a catchy name.
No,
it's just my brand is my name.
Yeah, and a lot of people do that, and I think it's a great way to get your name out there. I don't know. For me, RobBurger.com didn't really seem. I don't know. It wasn't. Maybe I should have gone that way. DoughRoller. Yeah, I don't know. But we were just talking about podcasting, and I know you're thinking about doing it. And I was kind of, before we started recording, talking about some of the equipment that you buy. I've got this soundboard next to me, and I've got this big microphone in my face as I talk. And but Beverly, the thing that I found with podcasting is that I'm surprised at the interaction it generates with folks that listen to your. I get emails in fact, I just got one, and I'll probably make an entire podcast out of it. A listener named Brian. A listener named Brian emailed me about emergency funds. He wants to use the money he has in the savings account to pay down a car loan, and use his home equity line of credit as an emergency fund. So he's written me this long, thoughtful email about that topic. I actually think it's a good idea, what he's proposing, but for some people it wouldn't be, I don't think. But in any event, I get all those emails all the time, and I love to receive them and respond to them. And that's one of the things that podcasting has done. It's really made my audience a lot more interactive. I interact with folks a lot more since starting the podcast. So when do you think you'll start yours?
I'm working on it right now. I'm sort of at my research stage, and I'm pretty neurotic when it comes to research. So whenever I start something new, I have to go through this big research, preamble before I start something. So you've given me some good advice and some good tips. So I'm on my way. I don't have a date set yet, but I'm just kind of taking my time and learning everything I can from people like you who podcast.
Yeah, one of the sites that I mentioned to Beverly is Podcast Answer Man, Cliff Ravenscraft. And if you're thinking about a podcast and you're not familiar with his site, I highly recommend it. He has a lot of video tutorials. He walks through all the equipment and how to set it up. And if you listen to his podcasts, he's just got, well, first of all, he's got a fantastic radio voice. And I guess, you're born without it or you're not, I don't know. But he's got a great voice and just produces a fantastic show. And that's one of the things I do is I listen to other podcasts, and preferably, or many of the times, not in the world of personal finance, just to see what other people are doing and try to get tips. But for folks thinking about it, that's a great site to check out. But today we're going to talk about Beverly and credit, and we're going to talk about her book, Confessions of a Credit Junkie. And in the book, Beverly, you mentioned that I guess before you came to your senses, so to speak, you weren't sure of the exact amount, but you're pretty sure it was around $20,000 in credit card debt. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I kind of want to go back to the beginning. We're going to, you tackled that debt and you got out of debt, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did.
I'd like to kind of go back, though, because a lot of people listening are in credit card debt. Maybe folks have been trying to get out of credit card debt for a long time, and they're struggling. And so I kind of want to hear your story. Can we go back? Like, when was the first time you even got a credit card?
It's a pretty common story, really. Right after I got out of college, I started getting all of these offers for credit cards. And it's funny because I have an accounting degree and I actually worked in a finance department for an oil company. But this is totally different from personal finance. Okay. I really was, I hate to use the word financially illiterate, but that actually is what I was at the time. So I started getting all of these offers from credit card companies. And they would, the envelopes would say things like, "Oh, you've earned this, you deserve this." And so I'm like, "Oh God, yeah, they want me." So I started applying for all these credit cards. I applied for, I think by the end of the day, I had about 7 cards. Okay. Wow. And I maxed out all these cards. And I got all these in a very short period of time. And this was a couple of decades ago, and it was just very, very easy to get credit cards. And these days, I probably wouldn't have been able to get away with, applying for so many in such a short amount of time. That would have raised a red flag with some issuers because it would have made me look like I was desperate for credit. Back then, it was just credit was very easy. So, once I started carrying a balance, and this is where it starts. You start carrying a balance on one card. And then the shock factor goes away. Okay. Once you get used to that, then it's very easy to carry a balance on the next card. So, very slowly and gradually, I started carrying balances on all my cards for things at the time I thought I actually needed, but of course I didn't. I was a bit of a shopaholic. I worked in an office with a lot of men. I felt like I needed clothes to be credible. I mean, obviously I had some self-confidence issues. There's usually an emotional component, when you're overspending like that. Mm-hmm. Because I was buying a lot of designer clothes, shoes, going out for power lunches, which is really spending and not tracking any of it.
Yeah, that emotional component, I think, is easy to overlook.
It is, and that's really what was driving it. And then if you couple that with not having any system in place, no budget, not tracking spending, not paying attention at all. I wasn't even balancing my checking account at the time. So, when I look back, I mean, there were just so many things I did wrong.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was that I didn't know what I didn't know. And I just kept getting myself into a bigger and bigger, debt by not addressing the issue when it first started.
So I'm curious, if you can remember back, you said it was a couple of decades ago.
Yes.
When you first decided, you saw all these offers coming in the mail and telling you how much you deserved. It almost makes you feel mature and grown up. At least it did for me.
It did. I felt special.
Yeah, you do. You feel like I'm now an adult. I've got a credit card, which is I guess a sad testament. But when you got your first credit card, was there any sort of internal discussion, in your own mind where you think, okay, I'm going to get this credit card, but I'm going to pay it off in full every month? Or did you not even think about that one way or another?
I didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
All right. I was a total novice when it came to credit cards. I actually had one credit card in college, and it was for a department store. And that was my very first credit card. But I didn't have a problem with that credit card. It wasn't until I got out of college, and ironically, when I actually had money to spend. I'd never had money before. I had worked my way through college. So I was just kind of like drunk with the freedom of all this money. And, when I mentioned I felt special getting these offers, I didn't realize they were making the same offer to millions of other people. Right. It's not like I was special or they singled me out. I was just part of the herd they were trying to reel in. And so I just kind of fell for it. I was just young and naive. But, it's a slippery slope. Once you start, the debt on carrying a balance on one card, when that first happened, I should have said, oh, my God, I need to get a grip on this. But I didn't. I was thinking, I have this other card. This one's maxed out. I have another card. And it sounds terrible to say all this now, but it's true. And so then I would max out the next card. And it just, sort of like a domino effect. And then before I knew it, all my cards were maxed out. And got to the point where I couldn't even make my minimum payments.
So how long did it take you? So you were out of college,
Mm-hmm.
I guess just a year or so when you got your first credit card. And then did you start racking up a balance immediately?
Just about. I mean, within a couple of months, I started getting offers, and I had all those cards, within about 6 months or so. And for a while, I was able to juggle. Okay, and I was able to, put a lot on my cards and then make the minimum payments. But the problem is the credit card issuers thought I was such a great customer. They kept raising my limits. Okay. They're like, okay, this woman is spending. We're going to give her more.
Yeah. More interest charges for them.
She can keep spending, and paying interest.
So how long did it take you to max out? You started with one card and you got 7. How long did it take you to rack up $20,000 in credit card debt on power lunches and clothes and?
Oh, let's see, a couple of years. Because during that time I was also making payments. So I would say after about 5 to 6 years, I hit the point where I couldn't spend anymore. I was maxed out, and I couldn't get another credit card. In fact, that card I mentioned earlier, that retail card, that was taken away from me one night as I was trying to buy some designer jeans. I still remember it like it happened yesterday. I was standing in line, and I handed over my credit card, and the sales clerk goes, "Sorry, ma'am, your card's been denied." And I'm like, "That's impossible, And she goes, "You're going to have to call customer service." So I did. And they told me, they said, your card is maxed out. You don't make your payments on time, or we're taking your card away.
Wow.
And a retail card. I mean, you've got to be like a total disaster to have a retail card taken away. And that was my rock bottom moment. When that happened, I sat down and go, I can't live like this anymore. I mean, I just reached a point where, I had to fix my life. I knew I had to fix it. And that was it. I mean, I think that most people that have been in terrible debt, they have that moment where they hit rock bottom and they think, I will do whatever it takes to get my life back. Yeah. And that's where I was that night.
Okay. So that's when you hit rock bottom. So what did you do? What was the first step you took after they took your store credit card away from you?
Yeah.
To make, to move in the right direction.
Right. I had actually stopped going to my mailbox. It was so bad.
Wow.
Because it was just, I couldn't handle the stress of the bills. And, I don't recommend this approach. It just got worse. Okay. Things really, and that's led to that night with the designer jeans I never bought. So I finally sat down with all of my mail and started going through. I was so terrified because, I was single. I only had my income to get myself out of this mess. I took responsibility. I did. I didn't ask anyone to help me. So that night, I sat down with all of my mail, and I started writing checks for what I could afford. I paid the electric bill and the phone bill because I had to have those. And then with the credit cards, I paid what I could. Okay. And at this point, I had already been getting phone calls from debt collectors. Okay. And I was, just deleting the messages and not returning calls and not answering the phone. And as I mentioned, I was single. It was, it was difficult because I wanted to answer the phone. But so I sat down, I just, I paid what I could. And until I could get myself back on track to make the minimums. And so I sat down, and I for the next couple of weeks, I read everything I could get my hands on about personal finance.
Do you remember what you read?
Oh, gosh, every magazine imaginable. I mean, some of the magazines we have now were available back then, Kiplingers and Money. Remember, this was the time before the internet.
Right.
So I was reading just whatever I could find, whatever I could get my hands on. I live in Atlanta, so Clark Howard was big in Atlanta.
Okay.
So, I read things that he wrote, in particular books and columns. And, I just started reading stuff I never would have read before because I would have thought it too boring. But what I discovered was the more I became empowered and learned how to budget and track my spending, the more I became empowered, the more confidence I had. And as I gained more confidence, I didn't need to spend as much. I just felt good inside. So there's that emotional component again. And so, as I became more confident, I set up a budget, I tracked my spending, and I went through that budget like nobody's business. I mean, I looked at every single line item and I squeezed out $1 wherever I could find it. I mean, I threw every extra buck I could find at my debt. And I started, from what I had learned, I started with the highest interest rate debt that I had. And I don't remember how high it was at the time, but I know it was high because I know I had penalty rates at this point.
Yeah.
So I started with the highest interest rate and I started working my way down. And it was just, I kept telling myself one day at a time, I'm going to get up today. I'm going to do what I can to pay off my debt. I got rid of a lot of the frivolous things I was doing. I no longer bought shoes just because I wanted to. I didn't buy them unless I needed them, and then I didn't buy designer shoes anymore.
Well, let me stop you there if I could. Sure. In your story, because that's a lot of great stuff, and I just have a few kind of questions. One is on the budgeting. Did you just write out your budget on a piece of paper, or did you use a budgeting software or tool?
I wrote it out on a piece of paper. This was before the smartphones. I mean, now they're just wonderful tools. There's free software online, so many smartphone apps. There are great ways now to do it. But at the time, I felt I needed pencil and paper. I needed to be very involved in the process, write it down, look at it, use my calculator to add it up. So it was just, I took a very nuts and bolts approach. There weren't that many options at the time anyway, but just the process of just writing everything down, and being hands-on with it, that helped me tremendously. It helped me feel like everything was real. With credit cards, there's a disconnect. It doesn't seem real when you're buying all these things.
Yeah, because you don't see the cash leaving your pocket.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
exactly.
you tracked your spending the same way, just by hand?
Yes, I
okay.
did.
And then
I kept a little notebook with me all the time.
So you can just write it down right there.
Yes.
And you mentioned that you started with the highest interest rate first in terms of what any extra money you had, you threw it at that debt. Mm-hmm. And of course, mathematically, that is the right approach. You'll get out of debt faster and for less money. Mm-hmm. There are some that, as you may have heard, that suggest you start with the smallest debt first. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, you start with the highest interest rate debt back then. You've obviously learned a lot and you've, blogged and written a book. What's your feeling on that debate, highest interest rate versus smallest debt?
Yeah, the snowball method with the smallest debt and, working your way up. I think that has some merit in that, you get a boost quickly, okay?
An emotional sort of motivational boost.
An emotional boost, yes. For me, saving money was an emotional boost.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I was very into, I need to save money. I took a very practical approach to this, and I really didn't need the boost from paying off a specific debt. I needed to pay it down, and I was looking at where I was spending the most money. Mm-hmm. So I got a psychological boost from paying off the one with the highest interest rate. But I don't think that there is any one right way to do it. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, you've got to pick the one where you save the most money. But I think whatever works for you, we all have different styles, okay, of relating to the world and relating to our money. So whatever works for you is the right choice for you.
That's a great point. And I get that a lot from readers because some readers email me and say, well, I did it this way or I did it that way. And my question to them is always, that's great. Did it work? Okay, so you hit rock bottom, you started budgeting, you're watching your spending, you're paying your highest interest rate debt first. You obviously are making changes in what you're buying and how much you're spending. You're not spending like you were before. I'm curious, during that process, did you slip up? Did you make any mistakes? Did you go out and buy something and they said, oh, I shouldn't have bought that. That was wrong.
Oh, yes. It's, I was basically a shopaholic. And as I said, the more I learned, I was able to change my behavior. But there were some times when, I went out with a bunch of friends and spent more money than I had budgeted that night because I was having fun. And I like going out with my friends. And I had really cut back. I remember one instance in particular. I had just cut back so much. I mean, I spent a lot of time at home eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner. I mean, the entertainment was where I really slashed the most. And then shopping, clothes, things like that. Now, I will say I had an expensive health club membership that I had taken on when I was at the height of my shopaholic, shopping sprees. And so I dropped that. But I felt that I call this downsizing an expense. What I decided to do, instead of just, knocking it out of my budget, I decided to downsize it, and I started going to a local gym in my neighborhood. So I saved money on gas because it was close. It was a fraction of the cost of what I had been paying. But I justified that expense because it's very stressful to be in debt. And I felt that I needed to exercise to survive.
To take care of yourself. Did. Absolutely.
Right. And, I lived in an apartment, so I didn't have a way to, get any cheap equipment at home. It just wasn't going to work. So, I made a few exceptions. I was very strict in most areas, but I made a few exceptions because I needed to do something for myself. I think, people tend to fall off the wagon when they try to do too much, when they try to say, I'm not going to do this anymore ever, for the next 5 years. That kind of thing didn't work for me. And I think that's why I fell off the wagon that night out with my friends, because I had cut out too many entertainment expenses. I wasn't getting enough social time, and I'm an extrovert. I need to be out with people now and then. So, I from that point on, I started putting in, little bits of time with my friends, even if it was just lunch, because that was cheaper. Okay.
Yeah.
No alcohol involved. You could get a lunch special,
Right.
So
sure.
I started doing more of that to get social time.
Right. Okay. Well, good. So how long did it take you to climb out of $20,000 in credit card debt?
It took me 2 years. During that time, which I think is pretty good, but at the time,
terrific.
I had no kids. Okay. It was just me. I drove a very cheap car that I had paid for. It was about to fall apart, but I kept it. I decided I can't do anything with my car. I just got to keep this car. So I lived very close to where I worked. So that was a plus. But it took about 2 years. And, like I said, I cut a whole lot out of my budget, but it did help that I didn't have a family to support. I was young. I didn't have a lot of health expenses at the time. So I think I was also pretty lucky that I didn't have any emergencies, any type of health emergency, or I didn't have home maintenance issues. So I was able to just focus. Now, during that time, one of my strategies was to pass the CPA exam, which I did, and I got a better job. And so I got a higher income. So during the second year I was paying off my debt, I was able to, put more money towards the debt. So, I had a lot of strategies in place, and, lucky for me, they seemed to work out just as I had planned. The economy was in good shape at the time, so it wasn't that difficult to get another job that paid well, that paid better, actually. So a lot of things fell into place for me.
Mm-hmm. When you were paying off your debt, were you also saving for retirement or saving for an emergency fund, or was it 100% towards the debt?
100% debt. And, today I would advise someone to also be putting something away in an emergency fund. I'm very lucky nothing happened. Like I didn't have a car accident or a health crisis. Nothing really terrible happened to me during those 2 years. But if it had, I would have been in trouble because I had no emergency fund. I threw everything at the debt because I wanted to get rid of it.
Yeah.
I wanted it off my back. And today, looking back, I probably would have put, a little portion aside every week into an emergency fund just so I would have something.
Yeah.
And if I'd had a family, I would have looked at this differently too. I felt like I was risking only myself by not having an emergency fund.
Yeah, it does. You're that's why they put the word personal in personal finance, right? I mean, because so much of it depends on your circumstances, what motivates you. I think it's a great point you make that for you, the motivation wasn't getting out of a small balance debt. It was seeing your, saving money and seeing the debt come down as quickly as possible. And that's what motivated you. And the same is true with how you approach an emergency fund. Curious if you used 0% balance transfers at all.
I did not.
Did you think about it at the time? Did you know about them?
I didn't know about them.
Okay.
I did not. So that could have been helpful. I'm not sure what the market was like back in those days for balance transfers, but that certainly could have been helpful. But also, when I look back, I doubt I would have qualified for a decent offer. I mean, I was, I was maxed out and had very poor credit at the time when I started paying all this stuff down. So I probably wouldn't have qualified anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point, because most of the best balance transfer cards, and like the longest now that I'm aware of, is about 18 months from folks like Capital One, Citi, and Discover. Mm-hmm. Their average credit score for approvals is in the low 700s. You can qualify in the high 600s, but if you've maxed out 7 credit cards, you're not going to have a credit score in the 700s.
Right.
So, did you know? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Remember, I lost my retail card.
Right.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah. Okay. Now the next question I asked you, I escaped my mind. Well, that's okay. So yeah, well, the other thing is I don't know when 0% balance transfer cards came into play. I know we used them, but this was in like the early 2000s when we were climbing out of credit card debt. I don't know if they existed in say the 1980s, 1990s.
Yeah, I really don't know, but I feel pretty sure it would not I would not have qualified for these cards.
Yeah. Okay.
So I just did it the old-fashioned way, just.
So when you finally got out of debt, have you stayed out of credit card debt since then?
Yes, I have. I put down my credit cards when this happened, and anyone who's in credit card debt, put your cards down, step away from them, and get yourself out of debt. And if you can't make your ends meet, if you have such terrible cash flow problems that you can't get by without your cards, it might be time to talk to a credit counselor. Okay, you might need some help. But at the time when I had my debt, I stopped using my credit cards, and I slowly got back into it. And because I was concerned I wouldn't be able to use the cards, if I were a true shopaholic and hadn't learned anything or was unable to stop myself, I wouldn't be able to use cards. So I got back into it slowly. And, this time around, it was totally different. I felt, I know I keep using the word empowered, but I really did feel empowered. I felt confident, like I knew what I was doing. I didn't overspend. I tracked my spending. So I just slowly got back into the game and stayed debt-free. And, I make money from my cards now. I'm not one of those hackers in the sense that, applies for cards every month and does all the churning. And, that's kind of a hobby. I don't have the patience or the time for that. But I applaud anybody that wants to do that. But I do make profit. I save money on everyday expenses. I save a lot of money when I travel because I use an airline miles card. If you're in debt, you kind of have to get back in slowly and make sure that you're okay with cards.
Yeah, in your book, Confessions of a Credit Junkie, you write a lot about the different types of credit cards, including rewards and cashback and all that. So I'm curious, what are your favorite credit cards that you use on a pretty regular basis?
I love my Delta Gold card. Mm-hmm. I live in Atlanta, so I only fly Delta.
Is that an American Express?
It's American Express. And, recently they just changed the rewards program. Now you're going to be, instead of miles, it's going to be based more on how much you spend. So I'm not really thrilled with that development, but I'm going to, I've got a lot of miles put away with them. So I'm going to hang on to this card for a while and just see how that goes. So I save a lot of money when I travel because I have a lot of miles put away. And then I have a Discover cashback card.
Yep.
I like that one a lot.
Now, I still have the old Discover More card. I've never actually converted it to a Discover It card, which I think I can do with a phone call. Which one do you have? The More or the It?
That's what we did.
You converted it?
Yeah, just a phone call, and they'll convert you over, and it's a much better rewards plan.
It is, yeah.
Very comparable to the Chase Freedom card at this point.
Because I think, didn't Discover originally have like some points, some purchases were only worth like 0.25% or something like that? And right. But now it's all 1% or 5%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was like 0.25%, I think, on the first 3,000.
Right. So I have no idea why I haven't converted. I'm going to call today and convert to the Discover It card. Okay. Yeah. You write part of your book that I enjoyed is the different types of credit cards, which ones build credit. Like, for example, there's a section in there that, and I get this question a lot from folks, that prepaid cards don't build credit. Mm-hmm. By the way, when you were going through this, you didn't know your credit score. Because I assume back then it wasn't available.
I did not. And I think credit scores became available right at the end of the 80s or early 90s. So I was coming out of this when that became, when those credit scores became popular. But so no, I didn't know. I just knew I had bad credit because my retail
card got taken away. I guess it's funny now. I'm sure it wasn't funny then.
Yeah, and I tried to keep it light in the book because I wanted to share my experiences. But I have to tell you, I had a lot of sleepless nights over it because it doesn't make me look great.
Yeah.
So, I worried a little bit, and I work with consumers and I wanted them to know they could still trust me, but I also wanted them to know that I had been through something similar and I understood. I understand what it's like to feel like you're a loser because you're in terrible credit card debt. It can happen to anybody, and that's what I wanted to get across. It can happen to anyone. Smart people.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I'm curious, when you were going through this and getting out of debt, do you remember a time when you, first of all, was there a period of time when you were keeping your debt secret from everybody?
Absolutely.
And do you remember a time when you finally told someone the problem you had? Or did that never happen?
It never happened.
You kept it secret the whole time. Why you went into debt and why you got out of debt?
Funny story, actually. Okay, a couple of years ago, I was working for Credit.com. I was on staff as their credit card expert.
Right.
And I was getting so many emails from consumers and readers asking me questions about debt. And I could see these people felt terrible. And one day I was watching Confessions of a Shopaholic with my daughter. She was 20 at the time. She'd asked me to watch this movie. I'd never seen it. It sounded cute. And so we're watching it. And I don't know if you're familiar with this movie, but Becky Bloomwood is the main character. And she's a finance journalist. How funny is this? And she gets into terrible credit card debt. And this really sleazy debt collector keeps calling her and stalking her. So I'm watching this movie. It's funny at first. And then all of a sudden, I just started remembering this whole period of time that I really just kind of blocked out, because I'm the kind of person, once I do something, okay, that's over. I'm moving on now.
Right.
I'm looking ahead. I don't spend a lot of time dwelling about the past or things I've done wrong. I try to learn from it and just move on. So I started toying with the idea of writing an essay about this. And I talked to my editors at Credit.com, and they loved the idea. And it was called Confessions of a Former Credit Cardaholic. So that essay is what spurred the idea for me to do the book. And that essay is when I first, kind of came out of the closet with my former credit junkie, addiction and debt. And honestly, I got married right at the end of the 1980s. And my husband at the time didn't even know I had been through all this.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I felt like I wasn't hiding it from him. I just felt like it was my problem. I had done this. I was going to pay for it. So it just didn't seem like it was an issue to me because I had a good paying job and I was going to pay that thing off. I don't recommend that. I recommend everybody be open and honest, about money. It's, in these days, it's really even much more complicated, with what we've gone through with the recession. And it's just, things are more complex. There's more things to know now. So I would never recommend that. And these days, and I'll tell you another thing that spurred me on was people like you, Rob, people, the personal finance bloggers. I could see you guys being open and honest about, all different kinds of issues that you had all had. And I could see people responding and I could see it was helping people. So, that gave me the idea that, I could do this too. I could help people, if I come out and actually talk about it. So thank you, because it's people like you that helped me, come out and talk openly about it.
Well, and I think that's a good thing. One of the great things about your book is that a lot of times when we're going through a difficult time in life, it doesn't matter if it's credit cards or relationships or whatever, I think we somehow convince ourselves that we're the only one that has ever gone through this. Mm-hmm. And when you hear stories like the Beverly, the story you've told today, as well as in your book, goes into more detail. I think it helps people to realize, look, other people have been in this situation and they've recovered. That's
absolutely. There's hope.
It's very motivational.
Good. Yeah, I wanted to motivate people. And, One thing, sometimes stories about credit card debt, it comes across, like very negative. And yes, it is a horrible feeling. But I also want people to understand that, as you start to pay the debt down, you get a huge emotional boost as you're going through that process. It's not all negative. You feel great, and you get kind of spurred on. So early on, I did, make a mistake when I went out with friends and spent more than I intended to. But as I made progress, that never happened again. I just felt so good about what I was doing. I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I just, it spurred me to keep going. I felt great. I really did.
Well, and like you said, too, you made some adjustments after that experience. Where you said, well, maybe I'm cutting back a little too much, but let me figure out a way to spend some time with friends that doesn't cost an arm and a leg.
Right.
Yeah, right. Which is terrific. That's great. Well, listen, I thank you so much for your time. I will leave a link to your book in the show notes, Confessions of a Credit Junkie. Folks listening can obviously go to Amazon and pick it up. I've read it. We've just touched on sort of some aspects of the book. It obviously goes into a lot more detail about credit scores, credit cards. Of course, it tells your story. And I think particularly for those that maybe are struggling like you did and trying to get out of credit card debt, it could be a big help. So I thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Rob. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Beverly. As always, if you have any questions, shoot me an email, dr@DoughRoller.net. I will leave a link in the show notes to her book, or you can just go directly to Amazon, Confessions of a Credit Junkie. But I'll leave a link to that book in the show notes. And the show notes can be found at DoughRoller.net/podcast 55. That's podcast followed by the number 55. I'll have the show notes there, which will include a transcript of the interview, and you can find that. And again, a link to her book. Thank you, Beverly, so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. All right. The money tip of the day it deals with marginal versus effective tax rates, and specifically why they matter when you're considering whether to put your retirement savings in a Roth IRA, or for that matter, a Roth 401k. If you've listened to some of the older, more recent podcasts, you know that I've started a book on Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks, and I've been diving deep into the research, and it was motivated, frankly, because of some of my own mistakes in this area, which I'll talk about more in the book and perhaps in some upcoming shows. But I made some serious mistakes that will cost us tens of thousands of dollars in taxes when we retire. And frustratingly, I made that with the help of an accountant. Unfortunately. But that's for another show. Today, what I want to focus on is the difference between a marginal tax rate and your effective tax rate, and why that's important when you decide whether or not to invest in a Roth-type retirement account or a retirement account, I guess I call a more traditional retirement account, one that's pre-tax, like a traditional 401k or a deductible IRA. So let's first look at the difference between a marginal and effective tax rate. So as you probably know, our tax system here in the United States on income is progressive, which means not all of your money that you earn, all of your taxable income is taxed at the same rate. And I'm looking at for the 2014 tax brackets, and I'll have links to this in the show notes, but if you are a single taxpayer, your first $9,075 will be taxed at 10%. What you make over $9,075, but not over $36,900, gets taxed at 15%. When you go over $36,900, the rate jumps to 25% up until you make $89,350. And it continues this way. You can imagine it's like you're climbing stairs. There's just steps. And the more you make, the more steps you have to take until you get to the top step currently for a single taxpayer in 2014 would be folks that are lucky enough to make over $406,750. For those folks, every dollar they make over $406,750 will be taxed at 39.6%. Okay, that's the tax bracket. You're probably familiar with that. And it's tax time, so you're probably more familiar with it than you'd like to be. So when people talk about marginal tax rates, what they're talking about is what bracket do you fall in? How much is your income, and what's the most you pay, or put it differently, what tax rate do you pay on the last dollar you make? So if you made $1 million a year, you've obviously made of taxable income, you've obviously made over $406,750 as a single taxpayer. So your marginal tax rate would be 39.6%. Let's say that you made $100,000 of taxable income. Well, that would put you in the 28% bracket because that applies for folks that make over $89,350, but not over $186,350. But now here's the key. When you fall into that bracket, it doesn't mean that all $100,000 gets taxed at 28%. Right? That's your marginal tax rate, or the most you pay, if you will, or what you pay on the last dollar of taxable income. Again, in the case of someone with $100,000, you would pay that 28% rate on about $11,000. What's over $89,350 on up to $100,000. You'd still pay only 10% for your first $9,075. You'd still pay 15% for what was over that, but not over $36,900, and so on. So the marginal rate, again, think of it as the amount you pay on the last dollar of taxable income that you make, or think it differently. Your taxable income takes you into what bracket? And if you look at a table, it's very easy to calculate because you'll know your taxable income. You just follow it to the bracket that applies for that amount, and you'll see what your marginal tax rate is. And there's only a handful of them: 10%, 15, 25, 28, 33, 35, and 39.6. That's your marginal tax rate. Now, why is that important? Well, let's go back to our example of someone making $100,000 in taxable income. Now, for that kind of person, they've made more than that in gross income. Let's say they've made, we'll just say $120,000, but they have some deductions. Maybe they have some health insurance premiums at work that don't get taxed. So maybe they made a gross income of $120,000, but after you subtract their deductions and exemptions and whatnot, they have $100,000 of taxable income. And now they have a choice to make. Let's assume they're going to invest in an IRA. Do they put the $5,500 in a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA? Well, as you know, a Roth IRA won't have any tax advantages at the point of contribution. You won't get a tax deduction from it. So if you were to put $5,500 in a Roth IRA, you'd still owe tax on the full $100,000. On the other hand, if you put it in a deductible IRA, you could actually subtract that $5,500 from your $100,000 of taxable income, and you would get a benefit. And this is where the marginal tax rate is so important. The marginal tax rate will tell you what that benefit will be. So in the case of someone with $100,000 of taxable income, again, before factoring in the IRA, if they were to contribute to a deductible IRA, the benefit they would get from that, in effect, the amount of taxes that they would save is easy to calculate. Just $5,500, the amount of their contribution, times their marginal tax rate, in this case, 28%, and that's the taxes that you will save by making that pre-tax or deductible IRA contribution. All right, so that's the marginal tax rate and trying to figure out the benefit of a deductible IRA versus a Roth IRA. But here's the important point, and that gets us to the second part of this money tip of the day, and that is effective tax rate. What's your effective tax rate? Well, you calculate that by simply taking the income taxes you actually pay, and dividing by your gross income. And so the person who's got $120,000 in gross income, $100,000 in taxable income, they're in the 28% marginal tax bracket, but that's not going to be their effective tax bracket, their effective tax rate. That's going to be much lower, and we could do the math. I won't go through that, but you'd again just figure out what their actual taxes would be. Remember, they're paying the first $9,000 roughly at 10%, and then the next roughly 27 or 28,000 at 15%, and so on. So we know their effective tax rate is going to be much less than 28%. It might come in at 15% or so. Would be my best guess. Maybe a little bit more, but probably about 15%. So that's your sort of actual taxes divided by your gross income. That's your effective tax rate. Now, the third point and final point of this tip of the day, and this is where it gets really important when you're evaluating whether a Roth IRA or a deductible IRA is best for you, is think about this. Let's fast forward 10, 20, 30, 40 years when you retire. When you retire, for most people, the vast majority of their retirement income is going to come from two sources: Social Security and the amount of retirement savings from their 401k or the IRAs like we're talking about. Now, that's, of course, not everyone. Some will have a pension. Some may have businesses that they continue to run in retirement and have a lot of business income. So, there are a lot of different scenarios. But for most people, I think, those are going to be the two sources of their retirement income, 401ks and IRAs, and then Social Security. Well, when it comes time to withdraw money from your 401ks and IRAs, what's your tax rate going to be on those withdrawals? It's not going to be your marginal tax rate. It's not going to be, not all of your withdrawals will be taxed at the highest tax rate that you happen to hit in retirement, right? Because that's going to, for most people, that's going to represent most of your retirement income. So the taxes you pay on the money you take out will be closer to your effective tax rate, right? Because you'll simply, let's ignore Social Security for just a moment. Let's assume all of your income came from withdrawals from your 401k and IRA, and let's assume they were pre-tax 401ks and IRAs, not Roths. And in this, using the same example, we'll ignore inflation for a moment. You withdrew $100,000. Well, that's going to be taxable, and it's going to be taxable as ordinary income, but it's not all going to be taxed at 28%, right? Some of it's going to be taxed at 10, some at 15, some at 25, and only using the current tax brackets, only a small portion, about 11,000 of that 100 will get taxed at the 28% bracket. Again, your effective tax rate will be roughly, again, we could do the math, but probably roughly around 15%. So let's think about this. When you made the IRA contribution, assuming you did a deductible IRA, you saved 28% of that at tax time when you made the contribution. Fast forward 20, 30, 40 years and you take it out along with other money, you're not paying 28% on everything you take out. You're paying whatever your effective tax rate is. Again, in this hypothetical example, probably somewhere around 15%. Now, obviously, a lot of things can change, and that's what makes this decision so difficult. Tax rates can change. We may have a flat tax by then. We could have fewer tax brackets. We could have more. You could unexpectedly land a job with a huge pension and have all kinds of pension income coming your way. Or you could start a business in your 50s and make a fortune, right? So there's all of these unknowns, a lot of which, by the way, I plan to cover in my book. But I think the first step is to realize, there's a lot of talk about if your tax rate is the same when you make the contribution as it is when you withdraw the money, there's no advantage or disadvantage for tax purposes from a Roth IRA versus a deductible IRA. That's true as far as it goes, except that for most people, there will be a difference, even if the tax code stays the same, because when you make the contribution, you're getting a tax benefit at your marginal rate. When you're going to withdraw it in retirement, it's going to get taxed at your lower effective rate. Now, what does that mean? For most people, it means the Roth IRA is not the best option. And I suspect people listening to this may disagree. You know my email, dr@DoughRoller.net. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong. So who's a Roth IRA right for? Well, I think it's right for people really at the lowest tax brackets. You may be young, and in some cases, you may not even pay taxes because your deductions wipe out your income. That could be true for part-time workers in high school or college. I think a Roth IRA is terrific. Or, you may just be starting out and you're in the low tax bracket, maybe the 15% tax bracket, but you think, your income's going to grow substantially, and, your effective tax rate in retirement might be higher than that. It could be good for that kind of person. But I think for most people, the Roth IRA is not the way to go when you're factoring in taxes. Now, there are other things to consider. As people know, there's no required minimum distribution for a Roth IRA. It can have some advantages with estate planning. So there are other issues to consider. But the emails that I get, most people are focused on the tax benefit. Which is going to be better? Should I pay the tax now or should I pay the tax later? It's a very specific analysis. I encourage you to seek the help of a certified financial planner. But as you evaluate this issue for yourself, the real key to this money tip of the day, and it's so important, is to understand that when you get the tax benefit from a deductible IRA today, the benefit is at the marginal rate. When you're in retirement down the road and you're taking money out of your IRA and taking money out of your 401k, you'll be paying taxes on that at an effective rate. That's the tip of the day. That's the thing to keep in mind as you're evaluating what is best for you. Hope that helps you. And again, if you have comments on that or questions, shoot me an email at dr@DoughRoller.net. And as always, again, you can get the show notes to this podcast at DoughRoller.net/podcast55. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.